You're listening to Non-Toxic. I'm your host, Daniel Penny. Beauty culture has obviously existed for a long time in many different forms and guises, but for the most part, I think it's fair to say that women have been its primary subjects. We judge a woman's worth by her appearance often, and her beauty in particular, and we treat beautiful women better, we treat ugly women worse. We ascribe moral dimensions to this, like an evil witch or a beautiful princess. Until pretty recently, a lot of feminist thought has been devoted to challenging these beauty norms and showing how the demands they place on women diminish their lives until, and I'm going to speak broadly here, third wave feminism comes around, and then beauty becomes something that's empowering if you individually choose to opt into it. And it's about your freedom to choose and to express yourself. In the intervening 30 years, we've seen an insane explosion in beauty products, cosmetic procedures, and lots of problems for women around their mental health and body image. But there's kind of a flip side to it. In the past few years, more and more men are falling into the beauty trap. And according to a report from the consumer research firm Intel, more than half of men, like 52% in America, use some kind of facial skin care product. And that's a 68% increase from 2022. And I'm thinking of like all the male celebrities who've been cashing in on their ageless faces to sell skincare, like Brad Pitt and Pharrell. And so on this episode of Non-Toxic, I wanted to talk to a reporter and beauty critic, Jessica DeFino, about how beauty culture has captured masculinity, why a rigorous skincare regime might not be so empowering after all, and how to move beyond the beauty trap. Jessica's work has appeared in the New York Times, Vanity Fair, Vogue, and many other outlets. She's a former editor for the Kardashian-Jenner apps, who now writes the newsletter, The Review of Beauty. And she has been called the woman the beauty industry fears the most by the Sunday Herald.
Thank you so much for having me.
I thought maybe we could just start with how men became sucked into beauty culture. I was thinking of that Mintel study that you had shared, and it made me think a lot about how I had grown up, which is I really don't remember seeing men use skincare products. My dad would maybe put sunscreen on his face if we were going to the beach, but that was it. And then by the time I was a teenager, acne products were a part of my life. So I was, scrubbing my face with the St. Ives apricot scrub.
Been in there.
And I was dyeing my parents' towels like orange with my hydrochloric acid. So I was doing that kind of stuff. And then I was watching things like Queer Eye, where, we had these savvy gay men who were there to help slobby straights. This is the original Queer Eye before it became disgustingly heartwarming.
Right.
And then we had to have like the concept of the metrosexual, which was like to explain.
That's what I was just thinking of.
Yeah. So like Ryan Seacrest. And so it was like these guys who were emerging as a new type of straight man who could groom themselves and care about their appearance. But we had to label it because it was so confusing as to how you could be a straight man and do those things. And I thought maybe like you might share some insights into when did this category grow from being a weird type of guy that has to have a label to being over half of American men? Because that seems like a big change.
It's a huge change. Yeah, when you were first talking, the first thing that came to mind was the metrosexual. I would say you could pinpoint this shift with the rise of genderless and unisex skincare products, which would maybe be like 10 years, maybe a little less ago. We saw a huge boom of the genderless skincare line for all genders. It was not specifically marketed toward women. And I remember being a beauty editor at the time and getting all of these press releases. And a big thing was just like, for your husband or live-in boyfriend, and you guys can use the same products, like save counter space, like teach your husband or boyfriend or partner to use your skincare. And this is good for both of you. So I think that's when it first really registered with me. And then after like maybe a year or two of that, you started to see more and more men's skincare specific brands pop up. I would say that's gotten big in the past like 4 to 5 years. And I mean, even like men's makeup lines, I feel like Alex Rodriguez started like a men's concealer line when he was with J.Lo. it's sort of like skyrocketed, I would say, in like the past 5 years.
I think of that image that you're talking of, like the girlfriend or the wife who's teaching the husband. So was that the idea that like women were going to be the kind of point of entry for straight men? Because if it was coming from their wives or their girlfriends, they could learn how to use it or how to apply it and make it a part of their everyday lives.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of the press at the time really focused on when I was getting PR mailers. PR people would reach out and be like, "Does your husband want to try this?" And I would say, "Sure," and grab the products and he would try them and I would write an article on them for like thezoereport.com from my perspective as a woman on how my husband liked these products.
Was he looking into your
Um,
ear?
no. Well, see,
So that
I
that was my next question. Is like, what is the
yeah.
beauty standard that these products are meant to help men achieve? Because I imagine that they're not identical to women's.
Right. The thing that comes to mind for me is like it's almost like a cliche on social media where a woman will post her boyfriend or her husband and be like, "How does he have perfect skin? He uses a 2-in-1 shampoo over his whole body. He's never washed his face a day in his life." Like, it's this big cliche that women are jealous of the men in their lives because the men have perfect skin and they don't do anything to it. And I'm like, they have fine skin and they do nothing to it. That's the lesson we should take away, not we've got to get them using skincare. Like, I just don't understand how we got there. So, I mean, a lot of the claims I would say on like men's skincare is more so around hygiene than aesthetics, or especially when you compare the women's market to the men's market. A lot of it's focused on like healthy, a little bit of anti-aging. I don't think you would ever see dewy, really. It's
Yeah, that
more
was a
just like
gift.
hydrated. Yeah. No, hydrated and like the healthy sort of hydration.
If you're an athlete, you want to stay hydrated. So your
Right.
skin has got to be hydrated also.
And like a ton of post gym skincare things, like get the sweat off, get the grime off after you do your big man workout. Here's the products you need to use, that kind of a thing. But yeah, I mean, the big irony of it to me is no skin of any gender needs this much skincare. What the average Western person is doing right now is too much. And it's sad that we've taken a population that was just like kind of doing the right thing, leaving their skin mostly alone, washing it with water, maybe doing some sunscreen. And we've convinced them to adopt these like often harmful, but mostly unnecessary behaviors.
And what are some of the potential harms of engaging in too much skincare?
So I think the two factors to really know about when we're talking about how skincare could possibly be a problem for the skin is you have to think of like how is the skin functioning on its own and what purpose does it serve and how is the body sort of like fulfill that purpose without industrialized skincare because for millennia the body did just fine. So basically the two things you need to think about are the skin barrier and the skin microbiome. These are the skin's built-in protective measures and they're more than protective for the skin, like they're actually part of the body's immune system. So it's the immune system's first line of defense. So there is a lot going on in this microscopically thin layer of skin at the top of your face. Basically, the skin barrier is made up of dead skin cells. Dead skin cells are this particular size and shape to be able to hold moisture. They're just not developed enough. Dead skin cells hold something called NMFs, natural moisturizing factors. They also work with the oils in your skin, the sebum that your pores produce, to create this barrier that keeps moisture in and keeps invading pathogens or bacteria out. This layer of skin is just so thin and vulnerable, and anything that you put on your face, even water, changes what the environment is on the surface of your skin. And some of those changes are like totally fine and negligible, like water. And some of those changes can have consequences down the line. So, like a big consequence of disrupting the skin barrier or disrupting the skin microbiomes, like very delicate balance, is inflammation. Inflammation is psoriasis. Inflammation is acne. Inflammation is eczema, dermatitis, rosacea, all of those things. It can disrupt how your skin holds moisture, so it can make your skin really dry. In doing that, your skin being dry, it could actually make your pores like overproduce oil and create oil slicks. Like everyone's skin sort of reacts differently, based on like your genetics, your internal environment, your external environment, where you live. But basically, the best thing that you can do for your skin is keep your skin barrier and skin microbiome intact. And just a lot of modern industrialized skincare does the opposite.
Are men and women's skin different? Like, I have read some scientific literature that like men have slightly a thicker dermis than women do, and that their pores are like a little bit bigger. Like, is that kind of
Yeah.
measurable, or is that like not really that significant and people overplay it?
I think it's measurable. There are differences. I think men, if I'm not mistaken, and I'll send you links that you can put in the show notes. Men produce like or have higher collagen levels. I think they have a slightly thicker skin barrier. There's obviously a difference in the internal pore layer of hair follicles because you're growing facial hair in a way that other people aren't. And I think a big difference that's not specifically skin, but a huge part of the skin is hormones. Hormones are responsible for sebum production, for instance. So the different hormonal balance of a man versus a woman is going to change how the skin basically balances itself or its homeostasis, its basic
Mhm.
functioning state. So yeah, there are some key differences. And I would say this is just my speculation. This is not from a study that I've read or something, but based on the small key differences, I would say that makes an even better argument for men not needing to mess with their skin
'Cause there's
as
less
much.
fluctuation. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
interesting. So a claim like specially formulated for men is
hmm
probably specious.
Yeah, I don't think there's that much of a difference on the product level. And there's really no reason that, like, it would be harmful or bad for your health for a man to use a woman's skincare product or vice versa. There's definitely not like that happening at the chemical level in production.
Would you say we're entering an era of like blue washing, or I don't know what to call it exactly, but like
Mm.
I think of, historically there's like thick for women and it's like twice as expensive and it's pink. But I do think in this one industry, like there is a kind of like blank for men where it's like the same product, but like butched up and maybe like all
hmm
caps font or
Yes.
something.
Yeah. And it's called like, icy steel instead of like, petal pink blush or whatever. Yeah. No, I think that's a good observation. I think probably a lot of the men's skincare out there is just the same thing that's been out there in a different bottle. I think a lot of it's kind of happening sort of in this name of like gender equality or gender inclusivity. These products are for everyone, which I really hate because I really just wish the like inclusivity went the other way. It's like, oh, if we didn't expect men to meet these particular standards of beauty or buy all these products, let's extend that compassion to women.
You're listening to Non-Toxic. In a moment, you'll be hearing more of my conversation with Jessica DeFino on Ryan Gosling's face fillers and the future of male beauty. But first, a word from our sponsor. This episode of Non-Toxic is sponsored by Blue Corn Candles, a Colorado-based candle company that uses only the purest beeswax, no petroleum products. Check out their taper candles, perfect for Thanksgiving or Christmas or a giant Hanukkah menorah. You can use the code NONTOXIC20, that's capital N, capital T, the link in the show notes, for 20% off your first order. Now, back to my conversation with Jessica DeFino. I want to talk about more extreme interventions that I'm noticing more men seem to be taking, specifically like plastic surgery. I was thinking about when Ryan Gosling performed at the Oscars last year, and I remember seeing on Instagram there's a lot of commentary about how much filler he'd gotten. And from far away, he looked amazing, like the living embodiment of Ken. But up close, there was this weird, like puffy plastic look to his face, and people were really dragging him. And I thought that was interesting because I felt like that sort of discourse usually was reserved for aging starlets, who are trying
hmm
to like maintain their youth and beauty. So I'm curious to get your take on like where we are in regards to men and plastic surgery, and especially
Right.
Hollywood, because I do think the current generation of male stars are dabbling a lot more in plastic surgery than any previous generation did.
Yeah, they definitely are dabbling, and it's been interesting to see that they are not exempt from the critique that aging starlets have gotten for decades. I think it particularly like provokes a reaction when it's somebody in Hollywood because one, they're already sort of like depersonalized and dehumanized to like the average viewer. Like we see them not as a real person, but a star. When you notice obvious work like Ryan Gosling's filler, it sort of like takes you out of that fantasy that Hollywood creates, right? And you see like I mean, who can say exactly what provoked him to do this, but you can project all these sorts of reasons. Like you can see the insecurity or you could see the pressure that he might have been under to look a certain way. And I don't think we like to see that kind of vulnerability in our stars, maybe.
Mm.
And it's just like, it's so obvious. How can you not say something about it? And then it's also, I mean, we have plenty of studies that show that we judge people who get overt cosmetic work done or put obvious effort into how they look as morally inferior. Like you can do skincare or get a French manicure or whatever, and you'll be judged to be a good person. But if you see somebody with obvious lip fillers or an obvious facelift scar or something, like kind of our just gut reaction as humans is in this particular culture is to be like, oh, there's something wrong with them. They're morally inferior. How could they do that?
That's
So I
grotesque.
think, yes, grotesque. It's repulsive. It's like, I would never do that. It really brings up sort of the ethical ideal of beauty. Beautiful people are judged as good, but if you're seen to be striving for that beauty, you're judged as bad. It's supposed to be natural. It's supposed to be effortless. If you don't put that effort in, you're judged poorly. And if you put too much effort in, you're also judged poorly. So basically you can't really win.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like the corollary there. If you don't put that effort in, you're judged poorly. Is that something that I mean? Obviously, we've all been through the pandemic era, of staring at ourselves on Zoom. I think men are not socialized to stare at themselves in the mirror and scrutinize
Mm,
themselves in the same way as women. It's considered vain. But I think this was a situation where men had to look at themselves all the time.
yeah.
And I am curious between seeing more celebrities getting plastic surgery and then looking at their kind of sallow complexion in the Zoom camera, like how has that kind of moved the needle?
I think that's such a great point. Even pre-pandemic, we were moving towards a more like digital virtual culture anyway. Then the pandemic hit and so many more of our interactions are through a screen. And so two things happen there. It's one, the other people you're seeing are also through a screen. There's a blur effect just inherent in the camera, right? And then there are all of these like tune up features you can use on Zoom or if you're on Instagram, there's filters, there's Facetune, there's Photoshop. So the inputs you're getting about what other people look like are completely warped and altered and blurred. So basically, you're seeing all of that, and then your only input for, like, years of the pandemic of what a real human face looked like was your own in the mirror, and obviously, it doesn't match up to the digital avatars that you're seeing, right? So it becomes really easy to see your face as flawed and needing correction. And then, there are so many more opportunities to just be staring at yourself in this like Zoom window on the FaceTime call, or even just like taking pictures of yourself, what you're posting on Instagram. And you get used to your face, one behind that blur of the
Mhm.
screen. And so then you're comparing your digital persona to your real life face in the mirror, and you're like, there's a disconnect. I want to look like that. Or you're staring at yourself in the Zoom screen and you're being like, my jaw looks a little uneven there, or like, I didn't realize my nose looked like that from this angle. Or so you're just, it's really easy to pinpoint flaws and then to compare your digital self to your real self and sort of like idealize the digital version of you. There was a really interesting study that came out or a survey that came out on the New Consumer a couple of weeks ago, I think. And I think it was Gen Z specific, but it was like the majority of Gen Z responders said they feel more like their real selves online versus in the
Wow,
real world.
that's dark.
And it's dark, and I think it has a lot to do with how the standard of beauty today for men and women is so influenced by the tools that are available to us digitally and the blur provided by being behind a screen. And we really start to identify with that version of ourselves and say, that's the real me. This one in the mirror is not. And so I have to do everything I can in terms of products and procedures to get this me closer to the real me in
Let's
the
talk about
computer.
let's talk about those male beauty standards because I do think Gia Tolentino had that great essay about like the Instagram face, and there was the
Mhm.
kind of homogenizing like look that the algorithm seemed to produce among millennial and like late Gen Z women, which I think has now been usurped by others. But like
Right, right.
that was a thing. What is the like male equivalent of that?
The first thing that comes to mind is, I would say, like the marvelization of male beauty standards, like superhero movie kind of pressure to like be jacked, have that like square jawline, have those sort of like not necessarily feminine, but like strong, but clear features and like hard lines on your face. What do you think?
I definitely feel like the jaw
Yeah.
is the most important element of male beauty. When you see the meme of what a Chad is, it's always like the jaw, the black and white image of the guy with like slicked back hair who's really jacked and has a
Yeah.
huge protruding chin and a
Yeah.
really square jaw.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, like that's a part of incel culture
Yeah.
as well, where they're
Same.
really into looks maxing and mewing. I think it's kind of like the boy equivalent of waist training, where these
Yeah.
guys are all like, chewing and like doing these like jaw strengthening and stretching exercises to like build
Mm-hmm.
up the muscle on their
Mm-hmm.
face and make their like change the shape of their face. I don't know if it's very effective or not, but it seems to make them more attractive to each other in a sort of
Yeah.
like, yeah, bro, like
It's like
nice.
pretty homoerotic, I would say. Yeah. Incel culture and how that has created looks maxing and how looks maxing now really exists beyond incel culture is really fascinating to me because there is no such thing as the female gaze in my opinion, but even if they're trying to say that they're doing this because they haven't been able to like get a high value woman and this is what a high value woman wants and this is how I'm going to, change my face in order to attain that. I don't think it's particularly attractive to most women. I don't know. And it really
You don't
does
like
seem
cube shaped individuals.
no, not a big fan of the box face. No, I mean to me it like truly doesn't matter. I might be an outlier, but I'm just like there's not like a feature that I'm like, "Oh my god, that's amazing." Like doesn't matter to me at all, and I think if you look at couples out there, you'll see the most average schlubby guy in the world with this, like, a model.
Incels would say he's rich,
Yeah.
and that's why they're together. But
Or funny, like, develop a personality instead of
well,
developing your
that's
jawline.
never an option. Develop a personality is never
Right,
seen as
right.
a viable.
The
They're
solution
stuck.
to so much of beauty culture is, like,
Yeah.
focus on just, like, becoming a person. I guarantee you that will get you farther in life than whatever you look like, but yeah, I don't know. I find it really fascinating. And I do think it's like less about what the average woman will think of you and more what this community that you've built around you of like-minded men will think about you.
We've definitely seen this huge uptick among Gen Zers.
Yeah.
You talked about the kind of genderless products and then the increase in products and surgeries targeting men. Where do you see men's beauty going?
I do think it's going to be more normalized because while these like products and procedures are on the rise, I think I just read a study that showed like a 55% increase in men's plastic surgery in the past 5 years or something like that. So even though they are on the rise, I don't know that I would consider them normalized yet. But I think we are going to hit that point where it's just kind of a part of the culture. I think something that's going to happen as we get there is that, like, as men feel the pressure to do this, they're going to experience some of what women have always experienced too, which is like, you're supposed to put in this work and then you're going to get shamed for putting in the work. Like, what comes up for me is I'm endlessly fascinated by the beef between Drake and Kendrick
I
Lamar
was
and
exactly
how,
going to mention
yeah,
this. Yes, I have a question
it's
about it.
so wild to me how this like rap beef in 2024 is about Ozempic and BBLs. Even though these behaviors are going to be more common for men, there's also going to be that sort of amount of pushback. It's because these behaviors are still very feminized in our culture, and I think we'll always kind of have that sheen of like being a thing that women do, which is going to open the men who participate up to a certain amount of criticism as well. And I think it's going to be really hard to kind of like find that line for people of like how much is too much and how much is not enough. But yeah, I want to hear your thoughts on the Drake and Kendrick thing.
I just thought it was hilarious that Kendrick was rapping to Drake about how he should be going to the gym, he shouldn't be taking shortcuts. And, Rick Ross was rapping about how everyone knows Drake got a BBL and
Mhm.
his abs are fake and all of this kind of personal body
Yeah,
focused beefing. I'd never seen that before. I mean, people call each other like fat or short or whatever. That's
right.
normal in sort of like schoolyard taunting. But this was a whole other,
A critique of the aesthetic labor,
exactly.
not like what he looked like, but the behaviors he engaged in to look that way, which I think is a really interesting distinction there. I also think that a big gateway into men's beauty in the next couple of years is going to be hair loss. Like the hair loss market is booming right now. I think it's going to like take over skincare in the culture even.
Maybe that's what Mayor Eric Adams was doing in Turkey, all those flights to Turkey. But I didn't see any improvement in his hair. But
It hasn't worked yet.
for listeners who don't know, Turkey is the center of men's hair procedures. They have by far the most doctors and like clinics that you stay
Yes.
at.
It's become like the medical or cosmetic tourism center for like hair loss, the way South Korea is like the medical tourism center for like facial surgeries for women.
Mm. I think also, you're talking about hair loss. We mentioned the marvelization of male bodies. It, when you take steroids, you often run the risk of losing your hair.
Mm,
And I do see a lot of these influencers talking about like what hair treatments you need to do in addition to the steroid cycles that you're on if you want to keep your hair and get jacked.
mhm.
And so I think that's a really interesting crossover where it's like one beauty
Yeah.
standard is actually undoing the other, and you have to like then add in
That
another thing to like
that
fix the
is
problem.
75% of the beauty industry is products to solve problems caused by other products. Like, you could point to anything and it causes some problem that you're going to need to supplement on the other end. I mean, I think a really prevalent example right now is Ozempic. Like the Ozempic market booming the way it has created what plastic surgeons call Ozempic face. And it's created a boom of plastic surgery and injectables on the other side because as you lose the fat from your face, your collagen levels decline. You can look a little sunken and hollow, and injectors and surgeons are seeing this boom of clients who've, achieved their ideal body with Ozempic, but it's had undesirable effects on their face. And now they're changing those with surgery. So that's kind of like a big example right now. But
Yeah.
even something as simple as using retinol, which can thin the skin barrier, it plumps the lower level layers of your skin, but it can thin the skin barrier. And it's like everyone's using retinol, and now everyone needs to use a barrier repair cream as well. Like these products all feed into each other. Hyaluronic acid, use a hyaluronic acid serum, and they're like, don't forget to put your moisturizer on top, otherwise it'll dehydrate your skin. It's a scam.
Listeners, I do use retinol, but it is prescription.
Yeah, no, and I'm not saying, like, don't use it. I'm just saying,
To
like,
recommend
created a
retinol.
market where you need other products too. Like, even, people
Yeah.
who use retinol,
You gotta have
dermatologists are
sunscreen.
like, make sure your sunscreen use is on point. So it creates demand for, like, more of another product down the road as it's solving, quote unquote, certain problems. But yeah, that's the whole beauty industry, I think.
It's interesting you mentioned sunscreen. I have also seen a kind of backlash against sunscreen
Mm,
among Gen Zers, and I feel like particularly it's like a broy thing of like,
Yeah.
bro, like our ancestors didn't use sunscreen and like they didn't have skin cancer. So like, what if
Right.
sunscreen causes skin cancer?
It's definitely become this sort of like right-wing coded, trad coded belief, I think. It slots nicely into like the anti-vax set, the anti-sunscreen set. Like
Reject modernity, embrace tradition.
exactly. And I mean, I think there are a lot of reasons for that. One of the reasons is that the US is just not where it needs to be in terms of sunscreen regulation and testing and approvals for different ingredients or even studying the ingredients that we do have. So it's really easy for people to take a nugget of truth, which is like, some of the more prevalent chemical sunscreens we have, we don't have enough research on how they react in the body. Like a couple of years ago, we got some research that shows they absorb into the bloodstream. Does that mean anything bad? We don't really know, but it's really easy for someone with like an extreme point of view to take that and run with it. Whereas in other countries, in Europe especially, there are a lot more ingredients that are approved for sunscreen that don't have some of the effects that active ingredients in the US have. Like a lot of people get dermatitis or a burning, tingling feeling from certain sunscreen ingredients. Or especially like people of color will have a really tough time with zinc-based sunscreens, and there's not like inclusive options. So all of these problems at the product level that the FDA has just not properly addressed yet can turn into an extreme point of view when taken to the nth degree.
It's interesting that it's a kind of like a conservative backlash, but as you say, right coded. So maybe skincare will become politicized. If you're kind of a lid soy boy, you have skincare. And if you're a manly MAGA guy, you're going to be rejecting sunscreen. You're going to be
Right.
roasting yourself to be as red as Donald. And like, why would you do any of that sissy stuff?
That's an interesting point. I could definitely see it play out that way.
Or JD Vance, does he wear makeup?
Well, he was rumored to be wearing a lot of eyeliner. But I think his eyelashes.
It's just
but I mean,
natural eyelashes. Like,
he does.
it's the best thing about him.
They're lush. They're lush eyelashes. But I mean, on the right, we have seen like very obvious cosmetic interventions too, like Matt Gaetz.
Matt Gaetz
clearly had some work done.
Yeah, I mean, Matt Gaetz looks like the skibidi toilet. Like, he's terrifying. Yeah, that guy's
George
face
Santos. It's somewhere else. And I think George Santos like admitted to using campaign funds on his Botox treatments. So it's like it's in the zeitgeist, it's in the culture, it's in the political landscape, and I think it's a bipartisan issue, cosmetic surgery in DC for sure. But it is interesting to me that a lot of right-wing men are going like sort of the obvious cosmetic enhancement route.
Jessica, thank you so much for coming on Non-Toxic. Where can our listeners find you if they're interested in going a little deeper on beauty culture and its traps?
Yes. The best place you can find me is my newsletter, The Review of Beauty, on Substack. The URL is just my name, jessicadefino.substack.com. I also have a monthly advice column at The Guardian called Ask Ugly. So you can Google Ask Ugly and I'll be there.
Thanks so much. It was great having you.
Thank you so much. I love talking to you.
And that's it for this episode of Non-Toxic. Next week, I'll be talking with Dr. Roberto Olivardia, the author of The Adonis Complex and a clinical practitioner at McLean Hospital. He focuses on muscle dysmorphia and is one of the people to coin the term. So it's going to be kind of a different perspective on the male beauty standard conundrum. Non-Toxic is hosted by me, Daniel Penny, and produced by Andrew Lewis. Our music is by Nathan Sharp, and the artwork is by Sam Creasy. And this season's sponsor is Blue Corn Candles. If you'd like to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/non-toxic-podcast and sign up to become a supporter today. We've got our newsletter, the Non-Toxic newsletter on Substack, which will keep you up to date on all of the efforts to detoxify the discourse that we're undertaking here at the show. If you managed to get all the way to the end of this episode, it probably means that you like our show. So I will ask you to rate and review it if you haven't already, and to tell people you know about it. It makes a huge difference.